May 1, 1960, the U-2 incident. When air power, missiles, and secrecy collided, this was not a dogfight. No jets chasing each other through clouds. No cannons firing wing to wing. This was a battle of altitude versus detection, secrecy versus air defense, one pilot versus an entire military network. On May 1, 1960, the United States and the Soviet Union did not exchange fire on land. Instead, high above the Earth, a silent military confrontation reached its breaking point. What fell from the sky that day was not just a spy plane. It was an illusion, the belief that technology alone could outrun an enemy's defenses. The Cold War battlefield, no front lines, only pressure after World War II, the world split into two armed camps. On one side stood the United States and its allies, confident, industrial, technologically ambitious. On the other stood the Soviet Union, secretive, heavily militarized, and deeply suspicious of Western intentions. There were no trenches between them, no declared war, but both sides were preparing for the worst. Nuclear weapons changed the nature of conflict forever. Missiles replaced armies. Minutes replaced months. In this new reality, information became more powerful than firepower. Whoever knew the enemy's capabilities first could survive a nuclear exchange, or prevent one. And the problem for the United States was simple and terrifying. They did not know what the Soviet Union had. Why intelligence became a military weapon by the mid-1950s, American military planners faced a nightmare scenario. If the Soviets had more nuclear missiles than expected, if they could strike first, if the United States miscalculated, there would be no second chance. The U.S. Air Force and intelligence agencies urgently needed answers. How many missiles does the Soviet Union have? Where are they located? How fast can they be launched? Traditional espionage could not provide those answers. Spies were arrested. Borders were sealed. Foreign access was almost non-existent. The battlefield moved upward into the sky. The birth of high-altitude reconnaissance, American engineers and military planners proposed a radical idea. Instead of penetrating the Soviet Union on the ground, fly over it. Not with bombers, not with fighters, but with an aircraft designed to fly so high that no enemy weapon could touch it. This aircraft would not fight, it would observe. Thus, the U-2 reconnaissance program was born. It was not publicly acknowledged. It was not flown by regular squadrons. It belonged to the shadow world of intelligence and special military programs. The U-2, an aircraft built for one mission, the U-2 was unlike any aircraft before it. Long glider-like wings, lightweight structure, minimal armor, no weapons, its strength was altitude. Flying above 70,000 feet, it could photograph entire military complexes with astonishing clarity. From that height, American planners believed Soviet fighters could not reach it. Soviet guns were useless. Soviet missiles were inaccurate. For a time, they were right. Early U-2 missions flew deep into Soviet territory without resistance. Each successful flight reinforced a dangerous belief. The U-2 was untouchable. Confidence turns into routine by the late 1950s. U-2 overflights became almost routine. Routes were planned calmly. Targets were photographed systematically. Reports returned to Washington with valuable intelligence. Missile gaps were reassessed. Threats were better understood. But something critical was overlooked. The enemy was not standing still. The Soviet military response, adapting under pressure, the Soviet Union knew its airspace was being violated. They could see the intruders on radar. They could hear reports from ground observers. What they lacked was the ability to stop them. That weakness was unacceptable, so the Soviet military adapted. Resources were poured into air defense forces, a branch of the military designed not to attack, but to deny airspace. Radar networks expanded, command systems improved, and most importantly, surface-to-air missile technology advanced rapidly. SAMs, the silent killers of the sky. Unlike fighter jets, surface-to-air missiles did not need to chase aircraft. They waited. Launched from the ground, guided by radar, and traveling at extreme speeds, these missiles were built to reach high altitudes. The Soviet SAM program was not perfect, but it was improving. Each test launch pushed the ceiling higher. Each failure brought refinement. By 1960, Soviet air defense commanders believed they had a real chance. They were waiting for the right moment. The man inside the cockpit flying the U-2 was not glamorous. The cockpit was small, pressurized, and unforgiving. Pilots wore partial pressure suits similar to early space gear. Oxygen systems were critical. A single system failure at altitude meant death. The pilots selected were calm, disciplined, and mentally resilient. One of them was Francis Gary Powers. He was not a reckless daredevil. He was a professional. He understood that his mission was not combat. It was endurance, precision, and restraint. And he understood the risk. If shot down, capture was likely. If captured, denial would follow. If denial failed, politics would explode. The mission profile, a military gamble. The mission assigned to Powers on May 1, 1960, was one of the most ambitious yet. Takeoff location: Pakistan landing destination, Norway flight path, straight across the heart of the Soviet Union. The route passed over missile development sites, industrial regions, strategic military zones. From a military perspective, it was bold, almost provocative. From an intelligence perspective, it was necessary. And from the Soviet perspective, it was unacceptable. A holiday in the Soviet Union and a perfect trap. May 1st was not an ordinary day. It was International Workers' Day, a major holiday in the Soviet Union. Military readiness was high. Air defense crews were active. Commanders were present. When the U-2 appeared on radar, it did not go unnoticed. Orders moved quickly. Track the aircraft. Predict its path. Prepare engagement. This time the Soviets were ready. Inside the Soviet air defense network, the Soviet response was not chaotic. It was systematic. Radar stations passed data to command centers. Missile batteries were alerted. Fighter squadrons were scrambled, even if they could not reach the altitude. This was not one unit reacting. This was an entire military system mobilizing against a single aircraft. For the first time, the U-2 was facing an opponent that could match it. Not in the air, but from the ground. Altitude versus firepower. The balance shifts at cruising altitude. Powers felt little danger. The aircraft remained stable. Instruments read normal. Cameras worked flawlessly. But below him, dozens of missile crews tracked his movement. Calculations were made. Launch windows opened. Engagement orders were approved. This was no longer a reconnaissance flight. It was now a contest between altitude and missile range. And the margin was shrinking. The moment before impact, missiles rose from the ground faster than any aircraft. They did not chase. They intercepted. One missile detonated near the U-2, not a direct hit, but close enough. The shockwave tore through the thin airframe. Control was lost instantly. At extreme altitude, recovery was impossible. The aircraft began to break apart. And in that moment, the myth ended. A pilot falls. A secret shatters. Francis Gary Powers ejected. Against all expectations, he survived the descent. Parachuting into hostile territory, he became something far more valuable than wreckage. A living witness. For the Soviet Union, this was proof. For the United States, it was a disaster. The aircraft had fallen. The pilot was alive, and the secret was about to be exposed. The sky is no longer safe. The U-2 had been designed to avoid combat. But on May 1, 1960, it encountered something more dangerous than fighters. A prepared military system. Altitude alone was no longer protection. Technology alone was no longer enough.